Hello, everybody. I feel like saying good evening. My name is Nancy Ukai, and I will be moderating this incredible panel of speakers we have today. The topic is conventionally known as voluntary evacuees, but I'd like to just briefly open by saying it wasn't voluntary and they weren't evacuees. Stories of World War II Nikkei refugees in Utah. And our speakers today will be Mary Wada Roath, Howard Yamamoto, who will speak about Keetley Farm, Yukari Marumoto Mikesell coming in on Zoom, who is a survivor of her family leaving California to Utah, Tom Izu, who will talk about a very scary encounter with vigilantes when they were in Utah, Alana Blumenthal, the curator at the Brigham City Museum, and she will be talking about people in Brigham City during and after the war.
Could you speak up just a little bit, because Yukari is having a hard time hearing.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to open with a slide that was published March 6, 1942. This is when the period of Japanese Americans being invited, told, you can avoid the camps by going outside the military zone. And this editorial cartoon is actually sympathetic with this government policy. And you can see the yellow line, which is a demarcation zone line. And the Japanese Americans often called anything east of this line, which ran down the middle of California, Route 99 was the line. You can see on the left, the military zone is the exclusion zone. And there's an American flag there showing that, I guess they're defending the United States from possible saboteurs. There's a sign on the foreground which says these people are going out of harm's way. They show a truck, with Japanese Americans fleeing California. The sign on the truck says they're loyal to the USA, but they're leaving. And the headline of the cartoon says, all packed up and ready to go. But in fact, it was really a case of, you better leave or you'll be locked up. And so basically, there were 10,000 people who left the West Coast, and today we'll be talking primarily about Californians. So that's only 10% of the people who were eligible to leave, who actually did, pick up and go. And it was a very scary time. For example, the governor of Idaho said, Japs live like rats, they breed like rats, and they act like rats. And that was the Governor Chase Clark at the time. And the writer Yoshiko Uchida said, we were thinking of going, but we didn't know anybody. We didn't have employment. And so where would we go? And in fact, she actually, when she was taking the train into Topaz from Tanforan, happened to see a friend standing on the train platform in Salt Lake City, and they exchanged greetings, and she said, what are you doing here? And this friend said, we left early, I'm just standing on the platform in case anybody I knew came through. And then the train left the platform. It was a very poignant moment. So the terminology, voluntary evacuees, earlier Kiku Hughes was talking about the danger of rhetoric. We're in this kind of straitjacket of being told, being framed, who we are and what possibilities are left to us. Because we all know that people didn't want to lose their homes, their businesses, their properties, and leave very quickly to some place where they didn't have a destination. Evacuees often refers to the case where there's a natural disaster, you're evacuated from a flood zone, from an earthquake zone, etc. Whereas the definition of refugees are people leaving a war, violence, danger to themselves, and they leave to another country, as you know. If you leave within your country, you're described as internally displaced. But this Army terminology was sugarcoating a plan to ethnically cleanse the West Coast without cost to the U.S. government. So were we race refugees? The WRA's plan, I was really surprised to learn, was that they hoped that half of 110,000 eligible incarcerees would self-relocate. They thought they were only going to build 2 camps. of course, they ended up building 10 camps, and, only 10,000 people left. So where did they go? 5% actually went outside the state. Utah and Colorado had the highest number, over 2,000. Others went to Idaho and the eastern portion of Oregon. And then the rest of the 5,000 on this map, were in so here, this shows on the light pink is military zone 1. And the dark pink part of California is military zone 2. And I've heard many Nisei who were elderly refer to the dark pink zone as the white zone. It was kind of the safe zone, the area where there weren't many Nikkei. But some people, 5,000 people, fled to this area thinking it would be safe before Military Area 2 was designated. Once the entire state of California, the entire state became a military zone, they were trapped and ended up getting sent to camps not in there from their home area. So there's a case of Bob Kaneko, whose family packed their mattress and belongings in a truck. They drove from Berkeley to Sacramento. The mother was pregnant. She ended up getting trapped in the Sacramento area and getting sent to Tule Lake. She had her baby in a tent. It was, there are many stories like that. So today we'll be talking about the Nakamura family first, who went from San Jose to Corinne. We'll be talking about Brigham City. Mary and Howard will be talking about Keetley. So just briefly, I'll talk about one case study. This is the Nakamura family in Utah, and they were trying to get into a camp after they left San Jose. Izo Nakamura was a very successful celery farmer in San Jose. He had 8 children. This is the children at the time and now. Many have since deceased since. This is one of our 50 object stories. 6 months after leaving San Jose in March of 1942, very sadly, Bobby Nakamura, who was 17 years old, died of Rocky Mountain fever 6 months into their refuge in Corinne, where they were trying to farm sugar beets and potatoes. They think that he really didn't get proper medical care. It was very hard being out in the rural area. And then the mother was pregnant, and they were very worried about their health. And so they decided to try and get into a camp. They wrote to the director of Heart Mountain, Wyoming, who said, "We're too crowded. I suggest you apply to Minidoka." And then they thought, well, maybe we'll try and get into Topaz because we're already in Utah. What's interesting is today we'll be talking about Keetley Farm, the colony or the farm where 130 Californians caravanned out. But the head of that was Fred Wada. And Izo knew Fred Wada. And he actually asked Fred Wada, whose daughter Mary is here with us today, to help them get into a camp. Meanwhile, in the internal correspondence, I'm going to just go ahead for 1 minute. This is the letter that Fred Wada wrote to the director of Topaz, Charles Ernst. And he said, "Here I am again asking for a favor. My friend Mr. Izo Nakamura and his family wish me to apply to you for permission to reside under your project at Topaz. The ages are from 56 years, Izo Nakamura, to 4 months, the baby. This family voluntarily evacuated with us from San Jose, California last March and have been farming themselves at Corinne, Utah. 2 months ago, one of their sons passed away. The mother has been feeling lonesome and the whole family has lost their ambition to farm. They asked me to take them into our group, but I am not in favor of a little Tokyo in Keetley, and I have been splitting up my group lately. Will you kindly accept the family into your project?" So meanwhile, the WRA is sending representatives to Corinne to meet the Nakamura family and assess them. He said they have coal, they're well dressed, they have a car, and the internal correspondence was, have someone investigate the case of Izo Nakamura and family and see whether some way can be found to keep them out of the projects. They have applied for admittance in central Utah, that's Topaz, because of loneliness. Fred Wada at Keetley knows them. And even Dylan Meyer was brought into this case and said, it's a sympathetic case, but find a way, if you can, to keep them out. So it's unclear exactly what influenced the case, but the social worker at Topaz did write a note internally saying this is a rather unusual case where there's been a death in the family, there's many children, which means more mouths to feed. And they were trying, the WRA was trying to reduce the number of people coming in from outside because it's more of a cost to them. But this National Archive file, which if you find your own, you may find a surprise like this. The Nakamura family found all this internal correspondence about their case. And I'll just, before we move on to our speakers, just point out this diagram which shows how the 120,000 people who were under custody of WRA can be categorized. So the top was 90,000 who went into the WRA concentration camps from assembly centers. And the bottom, you see this yellow, says 219 voluntary residents. So that means out of 125,000 people who were in the camps, and 10,000 who voluntarily left, if I borrow that terminology, only 200 were let into the camps. And the top camp to let in these people were Topaz and Amachi, the camp, actually the states where there were most people, fleeing to. So now we're going to turn to some of the survivors who we're so fortunate to talk to today. And Howard Yamamoto, Howard, would you like to come up here? We'll be talking about before his family left for Utah. Howard, would you like to come?
Okay.
We have this one slide of Keetley Farm.
Okay, I'm here to talk about our self-evacuation out of California, or I should say West Coast. And that's Mary and I. When we evacuated, you have to understand the situation that the family was in. Oh, by the way, on this picture are the kids from the Keetley. I'm this little guy right here. I was 4 at the start of the war, and it's amazing how I can remember things in the past. But ask me what I had for dinner last night. I have no clue. But anyway, what made our evacuation unique is that we left as a group of 130. Generally, most of the evacuees left possibly as a family, but we left as a group of 130, essentially a colony. Now, to get back to the West Coast, it was a complete chaos. There was fear among the families, and you have to understand the situation in California at that time. I remember, like my mother was in such fear because people, the Issei's, were being arrested by the FBI. They swooped down without any warrant. They had no representation. And these men, mostly Issei's, were being evacuated, not evacuated, arrested, and never to be seen again until after the war. I shouldn't say all, most, all right? And just imagine these men who were arrested, if they had a family for that 4 years, all of a sudden, the wife became widowers for that 4 years. They were left on their own. Now, in our case, my mother was just in fear, as I remember. She was just waiting for the FBI to swoop down in our family and take him away. And 2 good reasons. Number 1, my father, I still say he was an illegal alien. But I have an argument with my family about it. They said, no. Your dad was adopted. But who adopts a guy who's at age 30? And my real name is Taniguchi. I found that out after adulthood. And also, you know, as a Taniguchi, the main part of my father is that in the 20s, 1920s, he served in the Japanese Navy. And that in itself, you think, would have taken him away. I guess this is why the name was changed. Okay? But anyway, my mother was in great fear. And I remember we lived in Oakland, and she gathered anything that had to do with Japanese. Books, toys, letters, and burnt them in this potbelly stove that we had in the living room. What hurt me most as a child was she burnt a lot of the Japanese toys that I had, especially the wooden katana. Yeah, I never forgave her for that. Never. But anyway, this evacuation out of California, I can't say enough about Fred Wada. Initially, his plan was to evacuate his family. And then he thought of his relatives. But when the word got out, people wanted to get, be part of his group, and it turned into 130 people. This in itself is just a monumental task. With that knowledge, imagine when the 9066 was signed, you had about 30 days to evacuate California. Where do you go? In those days, to travel, we were not a mobile society. In those days, to travel from Oakland to Sacramento or Oakland to San Jose, that was a big trip. But to travel across California, across Nevada, into Utah or Colorado, it's beyond their belief. But he organized these people, and when it came, he lobbied on his own before the evacuation order. He lobbied in Utah. He went to various organizations, various counties, to see if they will allow 130 people to come in and farm. He was denied at various meetings up and down Utah. In desperation, he actually went up to the Governor Marr of Utah, and asked him, could he help us relocate this 130? They didn't want 130 to settle in Salt Lake, because Salt Lake had a Japanese community, and to bring in 130 here would kind of upset the status quo here. But essentially, he was looking for a farm area. So Governor Marr introduced him to this gentleman by the name of Fisher, who owned land and a place called Keetley, which is actually about 40 miles south of Salt Lake. If you were to go there now, Keetley Valley, where we settled, is now underwater. It's a Jordanaire reservoir. So if you would like to go there, see the places we lived in, you'll need a scuba gear. All right? But anyway, this is where we lived, and it was It was great. It was, we lived on our own. We didn't ask for any money. Anything that we grew stayed with the colony. But anyway, I'll turn this over now to Mary.
Thank you, Howard, and please save your questions for later. And now, Mary, Wada, Roath, and Brent will advance the slides.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for listening to our story about Keetley Farm. I have poor vision, so if you see myself stumbling through these words, please bear with me.
Hold it close to your mouth.
Okay. Keetley Farm was the largest self-evacuating farm community in the U.S. during the war. Oh, okay. I'm the only remaining member now of the Fred Wada family. Fred Wada was the one who approached Governor Herbert Maw about bringing a colony of Japanese Americans to Utah to avoid the internment. I would like to share the Keetley story in photos. I was only a year then when my family moved to Utah, and of course only have little glimpses of what that was like.
Oh, well, you want the return, okay.
Okay. I need light.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can do two things at once.
So most of the information that I have on Keetley comes from my family stories and interviews and articles that I've read. Farm,
We're on the reservoir now.
okay. This is the Jordanelle Reservoir today.
I jumped ahead for some reason.
The Jordanelle Reservoir today is 39 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. It is called the Jordanelle State Park. Before it became a reservoir, it was a huge high desert filled with sagebrush.
I have to keep it off the keyboard, huh?
Yeah, I need the light. Sagebrush.
Sorry, just 1 second.
I'll hold the mic.
Okay,
Okay.
Okay.
all right, and I'll hold this.
The valley was
I'll hold it.
was located now, but I can't see the paper.
Too many cooks.
Here, I'll do it again.
So now
Okay.
it's underwater, and so no longer can be seen. Okay, we're at the state park. The name Keetley is on the map, and also the Wada Trail. Both were put out by the Jordanelle State Park, and we're so touched when we saw the signs. This is a list of the evacuees. There were 130 people who made up the colony.
It's going ahead on its own for some reason.
You're touching that.
Oh, jeez, no good.
Okay.
Okay, these Japanese Americans came from all different areas of California: San Jose, Monterey, Lompoc, Los Angeles, but mainly they were from Oakland and in the Bay Area. 45 men, 20 who were single, 30 married women, 20 single women, 35 children, mostly were younger than 10 years old. 25 men were experienced farmers. The colony consisted of the farmers, graduates of agricultural school, carpenters, fishermen, fish dealers, expressmen, a plumber, electrician, a barber, a pharmacist, an auto mechanic, merchants, gardeners, and produce men like my father. After President Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066, there were only 38 days in which all the Japanese with Japanese ancestries had a choice to self-evacuate to an inland state, or to stay and be sent to an evacuation camp. These courageous people all agreed to pool their machines, stocks of food, and contribute much to the general expenses. They did this all within 38 days. And remarkably, they made it out by March 29th. When they all arrived in Keetley, no one knew what the land was going to be like because it was snow. The whole land was covered in deep snow. Freddie Samawada? Freddie Samawada.
Two images. Okay. never mind.
My father loves this country. Could I have a little more light? Yeah. My father loved this country, and he was angry and ashamed and embarrassed when he heard that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. His brothers, Bill and Ben, immediately joined the army. My father, too, wanted to join the army, but he had a family. When he read that the Japanese Americans had a choice to go into camp or self-evacuate, he said that he wasn't going to become a ward of the government and decided to self-evacuate. Born in 1907 in Bellingham, Washington, when he was 5 years old, his mother died. He was the oldest of 4 children. She died after giving birth to her 4th child. His father took the 4 children to Japan, and my father was raised by his elderly paternal grandparents who lived in a little fishing village, while his younger 3 sisters were raised by the maternal side of the family in a different village. During the 4 or 5 years growing up in Japan, in that little fishing village in Wakayama, my father learned an invaluable lesson that stayed with him throughout his whole life. He learned that a small community like the fishing village can work together and sustain itself and be independent, and that was exactly what he did in Keetley farm without any help from the U.S. government. When my father was 9, he left Japan for Terminal Island because his father was living there with his new stepmother and now 3 more siblings. He was now the oldest of 7 children. He worked as a schoolboy, worked in a tomato field, and when he was 16, could drive. He delivered milk on Terminal Island. He only had a 6th grade education because he had to work. He was independent and knew how to stand for himself. At 18, he had his own little produce stand in Huntington Park. He gave that up to his father, and then he moved on to San Jose, where his younger sister lived with her husband, who was a farmer. When he was 25, he married my mother, Masako Tabata, who lived in Monterey. Then they moved to Oakland, where he became a very successful produce dealer. He had a chain of produce markets, produce stands, and various supermarkets throughout Oakland. He was president of the East Bay Food Association. So successful was his produce stands that the Teamsters Union would try to force my father to join the union, but he refused. The Teamster Union would send men to harass my father by turning over his vegetable stands and cause havoc. But my father wasn't intimidated by these men. He would join organizations like the Community Chest, the Red Cross, and support good local causes in Oakland. He was respected by the white community leaders. He sold fresh, beautiful produce to Oakland and to the customers who were regular. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, customers stopped coming. And so my father had no choice but to make a decision quickly. Like most of your family, my father too lost everything, all of his produce stands, his house, everything. All those years of hard work gone. He was only 35. My mother was born in Riverside, Utah. As a child, she remembers the school, going to school in a horse-drawn covered wagon and churned butter to sell in the little local grocery store. She told my father that the people in Utah were very kind people. My father also read that in the newspaper that Utah badly needed farm laborers. I think by then he was determined to take his family, our extended family, and anyone who was interested to go to Utah. The first thing that he did was he took the train to Salt Lake City, to the Japanese community there, to get support from the JCL. But in Ogden, they were discouraged from bringing the group to Salt Lake City because it would endanger the already established Japanese community there. While in Japan, down in Salt Lake City, he encountered 2 men, Mr. Frank Endo and Roy Tachiki from California, who also were looking for a place to evacuate to, and they decided to join my father. While in Salt Lake City, my father contacted Lawrence Johnson, who was the Utah State Defense Counsel. My father explained to Mr. Johnson that he wanted to get some farmland and grow crops for the war efforts without any help from the government. Johnson was interested and then introduced my father to David Travithek. David Travithek was the Utah Department of Welfare. Mr. Travithek knew George Fisher. George Fisher had land to lease, and he was the mayor of a little dying town called Keetley. The two men, Travithek and Fisher, went with my father to meet with Governor Herbert Maw. My father told the governor that he was going to bring a group of law-abiding, good, hard-working Japanese American patriots, and that he would personally be responsible for all of them. He said that if any member of his group did anything illegal, he could be put in front of a firing squad and shoot him. That was my father. He loved those old cowboy movies. Governor Maw told my father that he would first have to get the approval of the people of Utah. There was going to be a town hall meeting from representatives from 29 counties, and my father should attend that meeting. So he, I think, also went with Mr. Tachiki and Mr. Endo. There were 350 people attending. The atmosphere was very hostile. I think my father went with Mr. Tachiki and Endo. Many jeered and talked about losing sons and families who were killed and injured in Hawaii. My father was sincere and told them that all these Japanese Americans were patriots, hardworking and loyal to this country. Out of 29 counties, only 2 said they might consider accepting the colony. By then, George Fisher had already heard about my father and the colony. Mr. Fisher had 3,800 acres of good farmland, and much could be farmed, he claimed. And there were buildings also. Needing shelter quickly for the colonists was imperative. It was agreed to lease the land. Fisher was asking $7,500 to lease the land for a year. My father put out $500 immediately to secure the deal, and later paid the $7,000 out of his own pocket. George Fisher did insist that he go to California to meet some of the people that my father was planning to bring, and this is what he did do. This old hill here, remember this old road? This was known by the group. No one knew what was underneath this cold land at that time when they arrived. My father said that when my mother saw Keetley for the first time from a hilltop, covered with snow, and saw the condition of the old set shacks and horrible conditions of everything, realizing that they had brought these people to this, my mother cried. And so my father named that hill Weeping Hill.
Okay, here's the building, right?
Okay. Keetley was pretty much an abandoned mining town. All the miners had left the town, and the town itself was barely making a go of it. This was the town that George Fisher was the mayor of. In Keetley, there was a little grocery store, a gasoline station, a barn, an old hotel, and several old abandoned buildings that needed severe repair. 2 additional houses were built by the colonies, along with a huge garage for 11 cars. I remember the story of how my father took the truck, returned back to Oakland to one of the markets, and picked up an old, huge, big vegetable bin that they used for washing vegetables. No one knew why my father had done this. But when he took it to Keetley, he asked Howard's father, who was the carpenter, built that bin into a bathtub for a fudo for everyone to use. And everyone in Keetley remembers that fudo, especially for those cold winter days. After the colonists settled in on 2 separate occasions, Dynamite was thrown near one of the houses to try to frighten us away. When Governor Ma heard this, he immediately wrote a letter to my father saying that maybe all of the colonists should go back, return to California immediately. The governor was afraid that this could turn into a national incident. My father read the letter, showed the letter to my mother, ignored it, and just tore it up and threw it away. There was nothing for them to return to, and no one wanted to go into camp. So one of George Fisher's family member became the sheriff, and he would patrol the areas at night. There were no more incidences after that. It turned out that the one who threw the dynamite was a young native Indian who later apologized and became good friends with the Keetley baseball team. Keetley land, this is the land that George Fisher claimed was good farmland, which was not all true. After the snow had melted, the colonists saw this: sagebrush, boulders, rocks. This is my husband who is walking through the sagebrush, the land. The sagebrush is high. This is what the colonists had to clear up by hand and tractor. Even my two cousins, who are 14 and 16, remember helping clear the land. It took, they worked 16 to 18 hours a day. They had to put irrigation systems in. There were deer, flies, mosquitoes, ticks, insects of all kinds, wild animals like prairie dogs, jackrabbits, deer, and deer that would invade their crops. This is a picture of my father with two other men checking the soil. My father is the one on the right. Harvesting. While the people harvested or worked on the fields, the children would be put in the middle so that they could watch the children while they worked. This is a list of various vegetables that they raised. Quite a large number of variety.
Went too far. Can I get back?
Mhm.
Right here?
A list of.
There wasn't a list.
There was
Oh, there was no list?
It disappeared, I guess.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry, we don't have that list. They also had chickens, pigs, sheep, and goats. Raising farm animals did not turn out to be very profitable, since no one wanted to butcher the animals. Most turned out to be the children's pets. My father was the first one to kill the chickens. He never ate chicken because he had to cut off their heads and they would be jumping off all about headless. But everyone loved chicken, fried chicken, and someone had to do it. I don't think my father did that for very long. They also raised pigs. No one wanted to butcher the pigs. Not until years later, when an Italian man came, he bought the grocery store there, and the Italian owner butchered the pigs for them. He also taught them how to make sausages. Here they are harvesting.
It disappeared too. I don't know why. There was a picture
yeah.
there
Food for
harvesting.
victory.
Yeah, that comes later.
Later, yeah. I
And
don't know what happened to
don't
the
know what
slide.
this picture is.
No, we have to go back again because we're ahead of
Yeah.
ourselves now.
Okay.
One before?
Well, the
Well, that's
harvesting
okay.
disappeared for some reason.
That's okay. That's all right. There's a picture. Is there a picture of loading the truck?
No, there isn't.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
On the farm, they were very successful. They delivered produce to the U.S. military base, to Safeway, to neighboring markets in Heber City. They also brought produce to the Topaz internment camp. Many of the colonists had friends who were in camp there, and they would go with my father to deliver the produce. And they would come home with stories of Topaz. Let me see, where are you? Can you go to the next one?
Well,
The
those
signs.
disappear too. All we got here is Food for Victory. Food for
Okay.
Victory there.
They even made a special box of produce for the governor and his family. The governor sent a special letter of thanks to the farm praising them for their wonderful produce that they had produced. There are some signs that I guess we don't have.
Food for victory, but
The younger people put these signs up that says "Food for Victory," "Food for Freedom" with the American flag. The young people especially wanted to show that they were providing for the country and doing their part.
we have that one.
Mhm. My father's two brothers were visiting. There were always a big party when my uncles came to visit, or when anybody came to visit. There was always a big celebration. Women knitting.
Here it is.
Okay. During the cold winter months, the women would knit for the Red Cross. Several of the women worked in Heber City as well as in Salt Lake City as domestics and other types of jobs. Our pharmacist, Dr. Yamamoto, he would help the doctor in Heber City. So whenever there was an illness or any serious accidents, the doctor was always available for the family, for the colony. The children of Keetley. Howard is in there, my sister, my brother, my 3 cousins. They are in this photograph.
Howard, and this is her sister Grace.
Mhm. And 2 cousins. This was really a promotional photograph, I think, taken by Mr. Fisher. He wanted to show the public, the white community in Utah, that, he is doing a good thing by letting the Japanese come and farm there, that they were doing well and the children were all healthy. A lot of it was a political stunt, I think. In 2020, my husband Brent and I talked with the Jordanelle State Park manager and asked if we could put up memorial signs commemorating the Keetley colony, and they said yes, and these are the 2 signs that we had put in. They installed it in 2021, and they are going to install a new one, hopefully an ADA sign in the near future. In 2022, our Keetley reunion was held with 160 people who gathered to celebrate these Keetley colonists, our courageous ancestors. It was truly a memorable event. We had 6 original members who shared their stories. The oldest was May Yamada from Hawaii. She was 96 at the time, and she's still healthy and alive. This little booklet is called A Letter to Ophelia. It was written by Mas Tsujimoto, Doc Tsujimoto. It's a little booklet of collections of little incidences and stories that took place there, written to an imaginary girlfriend. But it's a lovely read, and it tells a lot about Keetley. And the book is also sold on Amazon if you're interested. So thank you very much. That is my portion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Howard?
Yeah. Mary is being quite,
Can we sit down?
Yeah, right.
Excuse me, we're going to come behind you. Just pick it up.
I want to talk a little bit about Fred Wada. Fred Wada, as far as I'm concerned, is my hero. Not above my father, but just a niche below. Fred Wada, like I said, Mary is a little modest about her dad. Fred Wada, after the war, became a port commissioner in Los Angeles. And also, he was he was on the Olympic Committee. And Fred Wada was responsible for the 1964 Tokyo Olympic, with Japan.
Yeah, right.
She wants to qualify.
What?
That's okay.
And also, I found out that because they, you see, the Olympic committees are certain people selected around the world or different countries for the Olympic. And also, he was a great influence for the Mexico Olympic, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Mexico Olympic. And one of his favorite, okay, he came over to my father's funeral, spoke at my father's funeral, and we met at our home after the funeral, and he looked at me and he says, well, could I say it? I'll say it. Habo? Okay, that's what all the Japanese called me. Habo. Habo? You wasted your goddamn time as a school teacher. If you'd have gotten with me, I would have made a millionaire out of you. And I thought, oh, you know, this is after I retired. And I thought, you know, now you tell me. And I asked Mary, I told Mary about it. And Mary said, you know, Habo, it's true. Because one example she gave me was Fred Wada, you know, his produce store. He went to the backyard, I think. He found this Japanese guy thumbing through the dumpster. And he asked him, what are you doing? He said, well, I guess he's out of money and such. But the story that the young man told Mr. Wada was, well, after graduating from a university, is it, in Japan, the father gave, or the parents gave him so much money to travel around and learn about the United States, and he ran out of money. But I guess Fred Wada took him under his arm, and Mary told me now he's a millionaire.
How about lost his chance? Okay, how about I take the next one?
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Mary. Can you please give them another round of applause? I hope we have time at the end for question and answers. We have such a rich group of panelists today. We're now going to actually stream in Yukari, Marumoto, Mikesell. Kimiko, can she begin? She said to me in a phone call, I remember going into a small room with a closet. I've hid under a closet floorboard, a hollow board, in case people came to the door to kill us in Gardena, California. So I remember that. That's the beginning. I was born Christmas 1935. She was about 6 years old when the family got in their car and drove to Utah. And she remembers her mother burning the kimono, burning scrolls, and she remembers the smell of smoke. Welcome, Yukari.
Yamamoto, Mikesell. And our situation was a little different, certainly a lot different than the 130 Japanese Americans who traveled together. My grandfather, Yukari's father, led a caravan of 3 cars to Utah from Gardena. And his family was in the first car with 4 little children in the back seat. And his brother's family was in the second car. And then a second cousin was in the third car. Do you want to talk about that moment? Or? Oh, well, we had talked with Nancy about, spoke out a little bit what it was like when you were still in Gardena, getting ready to go on the trip.
Yes, I remember going by the fireplace outside, and there was smoke billowing out of the fireplace, and there was my mother kneeling in front of the fireplace, tears running down her face, and I looked at her and I said, the smoke must be hurting your eyes. And she says, go away, go away. And years later, I realized she was burning scrolls that was written by famous judo sensei that had given my dad these scrolls and signed them, and she was burning her kimonos that she couldn't take with her and obis. And I just walked by thinking, geez, the smoke is hurting her eyes. Took me years before I realized exactly what she was doing.
Do you want to talk about, Nancy had referenced when your father had dug a hole in the back closet?
Oh, yes. I remember playing in the hole in the closet, under the floor of this closet. And it was, my father had dug a hole, and so that the kids could hide when people came to the front door. Because at that time in California, there were people going around killing people, Japanese, when they answered the door, and they would say, "Konbanwa," and knock on the door, "Konbanwa," and of course when you went to the door to open it, they would shoot you. And so I remember that. It was one of those things, you know, don't forget. I was about 5 years old or less.
Okay. And what was the drive like for you?
Oh.
You don't remember. Maybe you talk about, do you guys have a picture up of the 4 kids
Yes,
with their teddy bears and their dollies?
yes, yes.
Okay, you want to talk about that picture, Mom?
We went to, let's see, what was the name of that department store? In LA. And my mother was shopping for the last time, and she looked up at the things that were on high shelves, so you know they wouldn't get destroyed by people coming in and touching it. And there were 2 huge baby dolls, mama dolls, and she says, "Are those for sale?" And Mrs. I said, Kurata, I think he said Kurata, said, "Oh yeah," and she says, "They'll go for a lot less price." And my mother says, "I will pay full price," and she bought a big mama doll for my sister, which is in pristine condition, and then she bought me the blonde-haired mama doll, which I really ruined the hair and dress and everything as I played with it. And she bought a teddy bear, panda bear for my little brother, and a Red Ryder BB gun for Hiroki. And I think my brothers still have all those items, and I still have my doll, and my sister still has her doll. And it was the last time we went shopping at Kurata department store. And we also bought winter coats for the trip across the Rockies. Yes.
One of the poignant quotes from that day, with the lady at the cash register, my grandmother had leaned in and said, "What use is money to us if we're dead?"
Yeah.
So she was buying her children a little happiness for their departure from Utah and the ride in the car.
She also didn't know how we would end up and if we would survive the journey, because we were a caravan of 3 cars, and it was my father, my uncle, and a cousin that we caravaned together to go into Utah, where my mother's uncle lived. And the zabuton was whenever we came to a fork in the road, we would leave a zabuton so that the people following would know which fork we took.
And that was because the first night after they passed the California border, they drove a little ways into Nevada and decided to stop for the night. They woke up in the middle of the night in darkness, surrounded by American soldiers pointing guns at the group. And it was because they had inadvertently camped on government property, and they didn't understand that they had done that. And so they at that point, then they were asked to. My uncle Hiroki was the translator for his father. My grandfather was the leader of the group, and Hiroki was maybe maybe 8 years old at the time, 9 years old. So to be allowed to move inland, they had to have a letter from a sponsor saying that they had a place to live and a place of employment when they arrived in Utah. And so my grandfather had to show, all the 3 men had to show, their papers, the letters that they had a place to go. And then they went ahead and searched the belongings. They had come to the California border in dread, thinking they were going to be searched there. But there was no one there. There were no guards. They just drove, and in the middle of the night, their belongings were searched by the soldiers.
Well, that first time when we stopped, because it was dark, my father had been driving a long, long time, and he had to rest. We had parked our car behind barracks, of all places, and so that was a problem. But I think the soldiers built a fire so we could heat up, warm up. That was a different one?
Yeah, that's a different day.
Okay. But anyway, one place is park. But he was tired. He couldn't drive any longer, so, yeah.
So the next morning, well, not that the morning, in the middle of the night after the soldiers left, one of the things they said is, don't go on government land again, and if you do, then we're going to arrest you. At that time, when they searched the belongings, they took the BB gun, Hiroki's BB gun, they took the radio, things that the family didn't know they wouldn't be allowed to have inland. And so those were tagged and taken by the government. But that's when the group split up, because after the soldiers left, they said, hey, we've got to get to Utah as fast as we can. We've got to get to safety. And my grandfather had the youngest kids in his car. He had to surrender the map to his brother, who had the oldest kids. And that's why they now were throwing out in the first car, they would throw out a zabuton, the sitting cushion when they came to a crossroads, so that the people in the following cars could know which way to go. And the person in the last car, my grandparents, would pick up the seating cushion to take with them to Utah.
Isn't that amazing what zabutons would do for you?
It's really amazing. But why don't we zoom ahead to West Point? So they had to drive through the night. From then on, they were afraid to turn off the cars. They were afraid to stop. And so they drove through the nights, and they had to go up I forget the name of the mountains in Nevada.
Passes, yeah.
The corner of Nevada into Utah.
Well, one of the incidents when we were in the car and my father got out of the car, parked the car outside of the town, walked back into town to buy a loaf of bread and some bologna or something for us to eat. And so we walked into town, and it's the mountain town, and he bought a loaf of bread and bologna and came back. And he says, when he went into the store, they didn't want him to beat the store, but they let him buy his bologna and a loaf of bread. And he came walking back to the outskirts of the town where we were parked, and that's what we had to eat. Yes, that was very interesting. We were fighting. The kids, how kids fight. We were having arguments and fights, and my mother would finally said, how can you be so naughty and fight when you don't know if your father's going to come back? It was something I'll never forget.
Yeah.
You remember these little comments along the way.
So that night, in the roughest part of that next night, so they drove through the rest of the first evening, and they drove through the day, and the second night they were going through the mountains at the corner of Nevada and Utah. And my grandfather stopped for gas, and the attendant at the gas station who owned the little shop there, he came out and saw the children in the car, and he had my grandfather go with him to pull up kindling and carry firewood, and made a bonfire, and then gestured to my grandmother and the children to come out and warm themselves. So that was an unexpected, very kind act that probably sustained them through their journey. But they went on to West Point, Utah,
to my mother's uncle's house,
Yeah.
and we stayed there for a couple of days. and then we had to find someplace else to live. And at that time, there was a lady called Grandma Thurgood, and she had a farm, but she didn't have anybody to work it, and her husband was old, and we moved into a one-room house that Grandma Thurgood first moved into when she got married. And so my family, here's a family of, what was it, four kids. And it was above a cellar, and we stayed there for a few years. We lived also in a tent before that on the property, and farmed sharecrop for Grandma Thurgood. And she was what I would consider my grandmother, because she used to bake bread, and she used to bake 3 loaves of bread and keep one and give 2 to our family. And it was every Monday. When wash day was on Monday, she made bread.
The other thing my grandmother had told me was that Miss Grandma Thurgood never slaughtered a chicken without slaughtering a second one for my mother's family. So she was very kind to her workers.
She came across the prairies in a hand cart.
Yeah, she was part of the Mormon migration herself years before. So I think we've used up our allotted time.
Oh,
Okay. That gives you a little idea, though, of what the kinds of experiences my mother's family had traveling inland.
it was very interesting.
Thank you, Sandra, the daughter of Yukari, and thank you, Yukari, and I hope we can have some time for questions at the end, but all of these stories obviously could be one entire program on its own. We're now going to have a presentation by Tom Izu, whose great uncle led a group into Utah from California.
Hi, everyone. This is like
Closer to your mouth.
this is. Oh, I'll just take this mask off. This is like a Halloween story, I guess, huh? So I'm just gonna read a story, so I won't wander off too much. This story was told to me by my granduncle, who during World War II led his extended family, including my father, his 3 older brothers, and my grandmother, into exile from San Jose, California to Utah. Part of this story is included in the 50 Objects website mentioned by Nancy. Oh, okay, slow down, sorry. In the early 1990s, I was the executive director of the Ukai Senior Services in San Jose, Japantown, and was desperately trying to raise money to build a new senior center there to serve the elderly of our community. My granduncle, Kozo Ishimatsu, was helping with this campaign and would now and then drop by to give me a pep talk. Kozo Ishimatsu, or Uncle Ishi as I knew him, was a very prominent and well-respected Issei community leader. Not only had he been a successful farmer and businessman, but he had played a key role in getting the San Jose area Nisei into local politics post-World War II, including people such as Norman Mineta. Additionally, he had been recognized by the Emperor of Japan for his efforts in helping Japanese farmers adopt U.S. agricultural methods after the war. Uncle Ishi was an imposing figure, quite tall for an Issei, bald, with a deep, low, resonant voice, and he wore dark-tinted glasses. He had a nickname that fit his appearance, too, the Godfather of Japantown. And I always felt intimidated by his presence. At one of his visits, he told me that he was going to visit Japan. And I said, "Great, Uncle Ishi, that's wonderful." He said, "But I'm not going to see friends." He was going to get there to get some help for all the Nikkei Senior Center projects in California. He told me that the Issei suffered terribly during the war and that it was time for Japan to pay for what they owed us. This shocked me, and I was a bit confused. Uncle Ishi explained, "The U.S. government has paid redress for what they did to us thanks to the work of many people in our community, including the work of young people like yourself." I had been involved in the local redress movement. Getting visibly upset, he continued, "So now it's Japan's turn. The Japanese government got us into this big mess in the first place, starting that damn war. God damn it." I was really shocked by this, since in my presence he had never sworn or acted so angry. He was a very proper guy. He then became really quiet all of a sudden, and it seemed so eerie, as if he was getting ready for some sort of confessional. He said, "Tom, I'm going to tell you a story I don't usually tell people about. It goes back to the time when we were in Utah. Your grandma and dad and your uncles were all there too. We had left California before the deadline so we wouldn't have to go to camp. We were going from town to town looking for work to keep us going. I was responsible for all of this, and yes, it was difficult. I remember one town in particular. They were in a town somewhere in Utah, I don't know where, having found a place to stay temporarily while they looked for work. He said that the town's welcoming party, that's what I'm calling it, made it clear to him in no uncertain terms that they better not still be there by sunrise, or they would be coming after him and his clan. Uncle Ishii said the others in his extended family didn't hear this at all, just him. Uncle Ishii said, quote, "That night I stared into the fireplace. Everyone else had gone to sleep but me. I knew what those people were saying. I knew their type. They were going to come and string us all up. They hated Japanese. I had the fire going really strong. I put a metal poker into the hottest part of the fire and decided what I was going to do. This is Uncle Ishii, I decided I would get the poker red hot and keep it that way. I decided that when the men came for us, I would take the poker, hide it behind my back, and go outside with them away from the house as far as I could get. I would then take the poker and stab it right into the eyes of their leader. He would become so enraged that he and his men would take me away and string me up. Then my family, including your dad and his brothers and your grandma, could make their escape since they would be so busy killing me with much enthusiasm." Those were his exact words, enthusiasm. Uncle Ishii concluded the story. "The white men from the town never showed up, and so we packed up and left. I never told anyone else about it, but just let everyone know that this was not a good town, and we better find another one." Once the full impact of my granduncle's story hit me, I was shaken. My father had always said that the evacuation and life in Utah was not so bad since he was just a kid, and he was like camping. Besides, he got to be with his best buddy, Robert, his cousin, and that's the son of my granduncle. But later I realized that my father and Robert were not kids back then, but they were 18 years old enough to be drafted. And in fact, this is what happened to them. They were drafted into the 100th 442 right out of Utah and sent into combat in Italy. It wasn't until years later that I happened to find in a book published in 1969 included interviews of Uncle Ishii about his time in Utah. But the story he told me wasn't included in it. It did mention adventures I assume probably came afterwards. According to the interviews, Uncle Ishii and his family eventually ended up in Cedar City, where he was able to convince the town leaders to let him stay since they could help the local farmers make up for the labor shortages they were facing in the fields and orchards due to their young men being drafted and sent off to war. He had also provided them with reference letters from local white officials from San Jose, a sheriff, various businessmen, attesting to the fact that he was not a spy. Eventually, once they got set up farming in the area, they were even able to bring temporarily Nikkei, who were imprisoned at Topaz camp, to help with the harvesting fruit and thinning the sugar beets. Free-range volunteer evacuees managing camp, incarcerated, and farm labor did happen. In fact, I know another voluntary evacuee family from San Jose area that did farming in Orem, Utah. They also hosted Nikkei camp incarcerees as temporary laborers on the farmland they were working. Also, oddly enough, members of this family actually visited Topaz and Heart Mountain concentration camps to see families and friends. They did not know my Uncle Ishii then, but after the war, one of their daughters, Dorothy Kobayashi, met my father's cousin Robert at San Jose State and later got married. I hadn't realized that her family had also been voluntary evacuees until I interviewed her years later at the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. I just knew her as Auntie, and she was connected to the Ishimatsu clan. One thing I'll just note is that going back to when Uncle Ishii visited me, he did later return and told me that, "I'm really sorry, Tom, I wasn't able to get money from the government officials," and he was really apologetic. And I said, "It's okay, Uncle Ishii, I just didn't want to get mad again." And he just said, "Well, they're giving money to fund the war, the first war, Gulf War in Iraq, if you remember that. I mean in the Gulf, not just Iraq. But, and they said they didn't have any money, sorry." And I know Uncle Ishimatsu was pretty upset about that, but he went back to his usual calm manner. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I happened to be once at a lecture that Norman Mineta was giving, and he mentioned Ishimatsu as someone who influenced his getting into politics, and I was so surprised because I knew this story. We'll now turn to, thank you, Tom. We'll now turn to our last speaker for today, Alana Blumenthal. representing the Brigham City Museum of Art and History. And they are going to have an exhibition in 2025 about Nikkei in Brigham City. Alana, will you give a brief introduction?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Alana Blumenthal. I am the director of the museums in Brigham City, including the Brigham City Museum of Art and History, which are owned by Brigham City. You know, we're a government department. We have been working for the last almost 3 years on an exhibit that will open this coming February in honor of the Day of Remembrance. That's about the Japanese American community in Box Elder County, which is our county. It's about an hour north of here. And we were approached by a man who came to the community after being released from incarceration in Heart Mountain as a boy to tell this story. And it's a very sweeping story that hasn't been told before. So we start with families who started farming in the county around the turn of the 20th century and go to post-World War II, post-incarceration. So I'm going to try to stay focused on the, I think Densho says to say voluntary. If you're going to say voluntary, put it in quotes. Relocation, self-relocation. So I wanted to give as much time. I should also say, I wanted to say I am really humbled to be asked to be here. I am honored to be on a panel with these people with lived experiences. And so I'm just going to try to do a little bit of credit to both the academic side of the research that we've been doing as museum professionals and historians, but also hopefully convey how important the lived experience, the oral histories, the family memories are to us. But I'm going to start on the newspaper side, and like I said, try to keep it to self-relocation, voluntary evacuation. So we have dozens and dozens and dozens of local newspapers. I'm keeping it to the first few months, right in that time period that's already been mentioned, that was given to get out of California, get out of the West Coast before forced relocation began. So this article, and I apologize because it's small and I don't remember. So this is already, this is only in March 27th of 1942. And this is from the Box Elder News Journal, our county, based out of Brigham City. So this is about a meeting of, I believe it's the Corinne Farm Bureau. And so we're talking here about labor problem, that they're already having a shortage in labor, the young men to clear the fields, specifically the sugar beets, which is a whole different lecture, but sugar beets were the big crop in northern Utah because the members of the LDS Church wanted to be independent of imported sugar. So they were making their own sugar out of beets here, major crop, major industry, and nobody to clear the fields. So there's already, as of March, this interesting juxtaposition between we don't have people to clear the land, but we also don't want Japanese coming from the West Coast. And I apologize that it does say Jap land deal. There's a lot of that in the newspapers from the time. But so, and you can see what's interesting here. I'm trying to remember what I should have highlighted out, what I wanted to call out. But a committee of 5 was appointed to discourage any sale or lease to Japanese other than a restricted sharecrop lease. The committee being stated that it was wished to retain and respect the friendship of the community, would be the interest of the Japanese families, of which there were many living in rural Box Elder County already farming. Don't sell to your friends. So already, what is this committee of 5 who's going to go to any proposed land sale involving folks fleeing the West Coast? What does discourage mean in that sense? But saying that basically we are currently friends with the families who have lived and farmed here for years. Don't mess that up by helping these people who are coming out, your cousins or maybe strangers, by selling land. So that is as of March, and I'm not getting into all of the details here. This is now April 2nd, 1942, and the Lions meet to discuss the Japanese problem in this vicinity. They are citing already 75 families have moved there. I don't necessarily believe those numbers are exactly precise, but it starts to feel about right. One of the problems that we have and why I'm keeping to very, very early newspapers reports is they're not necessarily distinguishing between the voluntary evacuees that we're talking about today, and then folks who are on work release from incarceration camps later on. They don't necessarily make that distinction, so I'm trying to stick as early as possible with these newspapers. The problem, there are some people saying some pretty awful things. A guy gave a talk about Shintoism and essentially why that leads Japanese morality to be lesser than LDS or white morality. This brings the problem of housing, educating, and the attitude to be taken towards them. So a resolution was passed to telegram Governor Ma for a commitment on what to be done. This passed and the telegram was sent. A committee was also appointed to work out a plan to follow in connection with these aliens. According to press releases this morning, so this is, a twice-a-day paper, I think, at this point, a meeting has been called in Salt Lake City in which governors and directors of agencies that have to deal with this problem from the 10 western states will meet and make plans to place these Japanese where they can do work useful to the nation's war effort. Most of them likely will be placed on farms. And then at the end of every article in that newspaper, buy victory bonds. And then we have another from, June of 1942. And this, I just did a snippet because this is really, it says a lot of the same things, but you start to see this progression from, we don't want them coming, to, we don't want them buying land. They're here, and then they realize it comes time to harvest the sugar beets, and nobody's there to do it. And so all of a sudden, the attitude does start to turn even in these white American-centered sources, very economic-based, very pragmatic-based, but pointed out that the Japanese evacuees in this county deserve a great deal of credit for the work done in the beet fields. They've thinned approximately 40% of the crop, though most of them were wealthy and professional men and women who have had to adapt themselves to this very hard in the field harvesting labor. They've gone from field to field under the supervision of a factory employee and have shown the right spirit of cooperation. Just another minute. Yeah, okay, just another minute. So those are newspaper articles. Those are really, really important. We have gleaned a lot from them, and these are things that have not been compiled in any place ever before. But where we started, where we are in the middle, and where we will end are with these lived experiences. So usually I don't like reading off of these, but I know they're kind of out of slides when I'm giving presentations. But these are really worth reading. George Matsumoto, at the time of evacuation, I owned and operated a chicken farm. My father was picked up by the FBI right after the bombing. Mr. Arioki of Honeyville invited us to come there rather than go into the internment camp. His words, about April 1st, we arranged to lease a farm and move to Box Elder County. Joe Kawabe, whose husband was Art, was a doctor when they fled, and they were promised farm work. They were given that letter in order to travel out of California, that they were going to work on a farm in Brigham City. And then at the last minute, without notice to us, the farmers went to Green River, Utah, which is 4 hours away, driving now on I-15 where you go 80 miles an hour. Where they were told farming land was better, and when they arrived in Utah, basically there was nowhere there for them to go, nowhere for them to work, and Art very fortunately actually ended up being able to work as a doctor rather than farm, and even then he was paid in gas and food. Another family sponsored by the Nichiguchi, there were several of those, and they came out and memories of picking the fruit, the musty potato cellar, going out there are hot springs near us, and those were very, very popular in the Japanese American community. We were also the home of the Bushnell Military Hospital, which was not segregated. So members of the 442 who were wounded actually went there to convalesce in Brigham City, and so the local Japanese community took those young men up to the hot springs for an event. And then this, I do apologize, I sent the slides and I realized I sent the wrong name. This is Jane Oda, not Linda Oda. They ended up in the Honeyville Church, which still stands. 7 families, they basically turned the attic into apartments for these families. And I want to pull this quote, these are her words I'm going to say. People say, oh, you were better off not going to relocation camps because you had freedom. Well, I don't know about that freedom simply because how do you translate freedom when you're harassed, you're told that you're un-American, and you're doing all kinds of different things, and that, again, Jane Oda, not Linda Oda. This is a tiny, tiny, tiny sample. I had pages to go through to try to put together a short presentation that would do any kind of justice to this topic next to the amazing community that I'm in the room with right now. But I do hope, and I'm just going to give a plug. So Box Elder County, a lot of people from California don't know. So if you've heard the name Corinne, Tremonton, Brigham City, of course, Honeyville, Riverside, these were communities that you may not realize your family has connections to. We are actively seeking oral histories. We are actively seeking family documents. We want to do this story justice. So again, I don't want to keep going over time. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm sorry if I didn't touch on anything. It was accidental. We are working really hard and with our community to try to get this right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana.
was born in Riverside. Wow.
Yes, and we found out planning for this that Mary's mother was born in the county, so we're gonna keep connected after this.
So many stories to share. We've gone over time, but would people like to have just a few minutes of questions? Are there any questions or comments?
Could I give one thing?
Yes, of course.
I know I overstepped my bounds here, but I have to get this out. When the Executive Order 9066 was signed, all right, as far as General DeWitt was concerned, anyone with a drop of Japanese blood had to be evacuated. Now, in Manzanar, there was this children's village. I don't know if any of you heard that.
Orphanage.
Children's village. And I wish people would really look into it. These were orphans who were taken out of private orphanages in California and stuck in Manzanar, in this area. It is a concentration camp for orphans. The reason it became so personal to me was, I would say about 2-3 months ago, I was going through the internet and there's Children's Village. And I looked and I said, oh my God, that's my cousins. 2 kids, a little, I would say a year or 2 older than I was. And how they became being was this. My uncle, who lived in San Jose during the, I would say around the 30s anyway, he was a rebel, okay? Japanese just didn't act this way. He was a rebel, and he married a white woman, all right? He was ostracized by the whites and super ostracized by the Japanese, all right? This went on even up to 1960, believe me. But anyway, he had these 2 boys, Sonny and Dickie. And unfortunately, I've never kept that much in touch with them, but I wish people would look into this Children's Village. I don't think a lot of people do not know about it. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Susan?
Yeah, could I just ask for a clarification? So I heard several people say that when the so-called voluntary evacuees tried to settle, that they were discouraged to not disturb the existing Japanese population. And then I heard in one of the clips that you just mentioned that there was a committee of 5 that went around discouraging. So was the disturbance of the pre-existing Japanese community, was that due to people pressuring them to not bring people in? Is that what I'm understanding?
Speak up.
Yeah. My understanding is that during the time when my father came, he met with some Japanese JECL officials, and they discouraged the group from coming because the already established Japanese community had a good reputation. They were comfortable, and they felt that if more came into the area, that they would be threatened more, and there would be more, they would be noticed more, and they didn't want that to happen. So they didn't want the Keetley group to come and settle there.
I just wanted to mention that the people who were forced to flee California did receive the redress symbolic payment. And yet the story really isn't known, and certainly what we've heard today is a first for many of us. And I want to acknowledge Kimiko Mar for thinking of this topic and arranging for the speakers today. I really thank Mary and Howard and Yukari and the descendants and Alana for being an important conduit for these stories to get out there, and it's just the beginning. It's obviously awakening memories for many people. So please feel free to talk to them now. Oh wait, one more question, Patty.
Just not a question, just a quick comment that I grew up in Oakland, and you really need this? Oh, that's for these. Hello. And when our family was traveling on a summer vacation when I was really little in a station wagon, we wound up late at night in Salt Lake City, and I don't remember the circumstance other than we couldn't find a place to stay. And I remember some strange occurrence of my dad making a phone call in a phone booth and driving up to a house of some Nisei family that I didn't know, and it was really strange and spooky for me as a kid to go into a stranger's house. But I remember the little rumblings I heard was somehow they were related or friends of family. And there was a part of me as a little kid that felt like, okay, there's Japanese that went to Utah, there's Aokis, that's my family that are in, but they changed the way of pronouncing it to Aoki, and some changed the pronunciation to Oki, and I felt like, what are they, embarrassed and ashamed? The little kid's head, right? And I thought, ooh, I don't want to get to know them. We're the ones that are still. It's so screwed up because there was no information to correct my understanding, and I didn't pursue it as an adult. I realized because that vestige of, feeling like, well, they wanted to be more white. They wanted to be away from us. So just leave them there in Utah. So I really appreciate, Kimiko, that you brought this up because it's opened my eyes.
And I think today, maybe in the intergenerational discussions that we have after lunch, this kind of thing, which is the trauma that's handed down of self-hatred, shame of being Japanese. My own aunt pretended she was Chinese American to avoid the camps. We know that people were getting surgery and changing their names and hiding. And that kind of trauma exists in our memory, and sometimes it takes something like this to awaken it. So see you this afternoon. Oh, Tom,
Really
please.
quick, I just wanted to put a plug in for those of you who know anybody who was so-called voluntarily evacuated. And try to get them to talk about it, because my feeling is that a lot of people who went through that, they don't think it's that important.
Counts.
Like the overall camp story, it doesn't count in that, but it does. It gives you a better, broader view. So please, if you know anybody, please encourage them to talk more.
Thank you.